Ranking every weapon in Apex Legends Season 23, let's go. First, we are beginning with the weapons in D tier, which are those that are underwhelming, and unsurprisingly, we have the Charge Rifle, the worst gun in the game for me. The Charge ain't bad at farming mid to long range damage and overall applying pressure, but it feels very artificial in its practical use cases. It's fun if you get that big long range headshot, but that's still probably not gonna knock anyone. And if you are far enough away to get the max damage, something like 300 meters, you're not really gonna be able to capitalize on that knock anyway. The Charge Rifle has terrible close range viability. Any other gun in the game is going to be better. All the other snipers and marksmen. And while the Charge Rifle is of course to farm long range damage and get those big hits at farther ranges, it would be nice if the gun was just a little bit more usable in the close range. Maybe it needs something like the bow check with an alternate fire mode. Second to the Charge Rifle is going to be the single P20, and yes, I do rank the single P20 and single Mozambique separately from the akimbo option, because you do have the option to use either just one of them or two of them, as you can actually hit that select fire button and it will put one of them away if you are akimboed. The single P20 is not bad as a starter weapon. It's pretty common on the ground, so you can get akimbo pretty easily. It has good range, decent damage per mag, but the overall time to kill and usability of a single P20 just is not competitive. The single P20 for me is really just a transfer weapon for my attachments when I do get another light gun or if I do get akimbo. Moving into C tier, we have the fine and okay weapons. These can have some moments of viability, but for the most part, you can forego picking them up. The Mozambique single version, our favorite old troll weapon, has grown up big time. The Mozambique is slightly better than the single P20 due to its single shot damage being higher, and the range on the single Mozam actually is not too bad. It has the best range out of any shotgun, and the fire rate isn't too bad either. Akimbo Mozambiques are harder to get than akimbo P20s, but they are still very common. Overall, the Mozambique single does not really need any attachments to unlock its potential, which means as soon as you get it, it is good to go. The second shotgun on my list is going to be the EVA 8, also in C tier, and I do give it the slight edge over the Mozambique, but in my eyes, it's the worst shotgun easily in the game. The EVA 8 can be fair if you are insanely close to enemies, but I find the amount of times that you get those little 12 hits just not to be worth using. The reload on the EVA 8 is kind of slow. You need to reload the entire mag to continue up your DPS as well, which does hurt its downtime. It has fair DPS when you're actually firing, and it's not the worst secondary, but there's just better choices than the EVA 8, so I would not prioritize this shotgun over a lot of other secondaries and other shotguns. The final C tier weapon is going to be the RE45. It's one of the guns that, in my opinion, is in the weirdest spot in the game. Ever since akimbos came into the game, it just doesn't really have a home anymore. I will say that SMGs as a whole are pretty underwhelming, so there is a little room for the RE45 to work as a secondary, and really the only thing the RE45 has going for itself is the fast swap to speed. I still enjoy using it with snipers at times, as you can kind of have that scout snipe run and go, but overall, it's a pretty forgettable gun. I wouldn't prioritize the RE45 over really any other SMG or any of the akimbos. In B tier, we start to have the weapons that are good and can be usable in certain situations, such as off the drop, and a weapon that is actually great off the drop is the alternator. The alternator struggles in most aspects though in Apex Legends because SMGs again are just not really that good right now. The removal of the disruptor rounds 2 seasons ago has given it a pretty weak and odd spot in the game. It just lacks overall competitiveness in the meta of Apex. It has a good total damage per mag and low recoil, so it does make it very usable at range, but where you really got to use it in the close range, it's just not going to beat out most of the competition. If you're struggling with your shot though, the alternator is a great confidence builder, and I do think it's a weapon that you can look at, but you might just have to swap off it as the game progresses. Next up, we have our first long range damage farmer, the 30-30 repeater, and the 30-30 is not bad by any means. It used to have much darker days and a lot brighter days. It went from being terrible to insanely good to being a good option right now, but just not the best. The worst part of the 30 is its overall slight weird use of having to charge up to get the full damage. It makes it unique but less traditional compared to a lot of other guns. It has a decent damage per mag. You really don't need much on it other than an optic to use it, but it's not going to beat most snipers and other marksman weapons. If you want to truly apply pressure at longer to mid ranges, you're going to want to look at some other guns. A gun that I kind of think is on equal footing to the 30-30 repeater though is going to be the longbow, and I did have higher hopes for the longbow, as the longbow saw a damage buff this season, but it mostly feels like it is in the same spot in terms of its actual practicality. It's still a fair option to just farm damage and level up your evo, but it's not going to apply that big stopping power of a Kraber or a Sentinel, and it lacks overall ease of use like a triple take. It's a good option though if you do need to split up ammo from your teammates and you do want to run a sniper optic, but generally generally, and similar to the charge rifle earlier, you shouldn't really ever need a 4-8x. 2 to 4 should be sufficient, and in that case, you might as well look at something like the triple take or maybe even the G7 Scout. Our first light machine gun is up, and it is the L-Star, and the L-Star actually had some buffs this season. In the visual animations, the gold mag got a little bit of a buff, and it did have a 1 damage per round buff as well, and it feels pretty fair to use right now, which was surprising to me. But overall, the L-Star just feels slow to the time to kill compared to the other guns that have similar range. It is an LMG, so it's understandable that the time to kill would get a trade-off for more rounds before you gotta reload or the heat cooldown, whatever you want to call it. It's definitely not a bad option right now. It's not too bad in the early game, but I do think you're gonna have to swap to a Nemesis or maybe a Volt as the game progresses, as those are simply just better weapons. And surprising for my list, for the first time ever, I am rating the Wingman less than A or S tier. The Wingman is kind of like the weapons before it. It's great off the drop. 6 rounds is more than enough to put someone down at 150 total health, but once you get the purple or red armor and you're going up against other weapons, you have to be perfect for the Wingman to have any sort of use case or viability. It's a fun gun to use, and it needs 0 attachments to work to its full effectiveness, which is nice, but the Wingman, in my opinion, maybe could use a little buff. Maybe we bump that mag size up to 8, and beyond the early game, you're gonna probably need to skip over the Wingman. It's just not gonna be competitive for most situations in Apex. If you are returning to Apex, or if you are new and you're struggling to play with randoms, because that does absolutely blow, you can hop in my community Discord to find others to play with, or you can ask me any Apex questions that you might have. You can of course drop a comment down below as well. I generally do see everything. As we move into A tier, we do have the guns that are in most cases are viable in Apex Legends, but are not necessarily going to have as a complete role in Apex Legends meta as the weapons that are above them. And rocking the bottom of A tier in a soft A, I will say, is the Devotion LMG. Surprisingly, the Devotion this season is not as bad as I expected it to be. It did have some baseline buffs from its previous non-care package version, so that was definitely welcome to be added to the game. I can see the Devotion being a viable secondary where you can whip it out and spray enemy squads down, but absolutely, it's not going to be that great primary mid-range gun. It still requires a ton of ammo, which can be a problem when you are running this as your secondary. It can be fun to use the Devotion to run things down in pubs, but it's probably not the most competitive ranked option that you are going to want. Moving on, we have another SMG that is just a little bit underwhelming, and it is the Prowler SMG. Now, the Prowler is in A tier because it is a fine option when you look at the entire meta of Apex. It has a great total damage per mag if you can get that level 3 mag, but without that level 3 mag, it feels a little unusable in my opinion. It still has a slower time to kill compared to some other guns, and it does feel a little unusable off the drop. The Prowler is not a bad option, but since it is a burst gun, it's not going to be for everyone. And if you want to truly be competitive again, I just don't think really any SMG, with maybe the exception of 1 or 2, are ones that you can use. And in a similar vein as the Prowler, we are going to now have the Car SMG. The Car sees some increased viability due to the ammo changes of last season and overall attachments being harder to come by. Since it can take either mag type, you're going to get this gun kitted up faster than most other guns in the game. It does feel like the Car just doesn't have enough total damage potential. It feels like you have to reload frequently to finish off an enemy, and if that is the case, there's just other options that are better. Flexibility though is going to be key with the Car SMG. If you want to split up ammo from your teammates, or if you are really to absolutely have to run an SMG because it's something that you just have to use, this is going to be one of your truly only good options. The first of a couple care package weapons are up, and the first is going to be the Kraber. The Kraber for me has never really been an S tier weapon ever since they did nerf that headshot damage way back. Kraber is a great option if you want that highest chance to actually knock someone with a sniper, but when you get to end game, everyone has a purple armor, purple helmet, you're not really ever going to be able to one-shot anyone anymore, which does make it feel a little undersatisfying. It's great to farm quick damage and lots of evo, and it is of course a lot of fun. It just lacks real competitiveness, and the ammo will be a problem, as if you do get it too early on, you're going to run out of ammo and you're going to have to swap off it, which could be an issue if you are playing like a slow ranked game and you're not able to get to a death box. Our second care package gun is going to be the Bocek. The Bocek, in my opinion, is the best marksman weapon in the game, but since it is in the care package, you are again going to have ammo issues as the game progresses. The Bocek is easy to use. It's kind of silent, which gives it a very unique effect. It's great for farming up your Evo, but again, you just got to be really aware of how much you are actually shooting it. If you're playing more passive, you probably want to skip the bow check because again, you're going to have to swap off of it. And if you do get to an end game and you are stuck with a 0 ammo gun, this is a huge problem. I kind of wouldn't mind seeing the bow check and the new EPG gun go into its own category of like a miscellaneous type weapons, and maybe we start rotating the EPG and the bow check between the ground and in the care package, so we have the bow check come back to the ground and the game has a little bit more variety. I think this could be something they could look at. Next up, we have the best ground sniper, and it is the Sentinel sniper rifle. The Sentinel is great for applying extreme pressure. Honestly, the Sentinel ain't too bad with no optic, and you know, as is the longbow. I should have mentioned that earlier, but the Sentinel is great as a close range gun because if you do connect even an 88 body shot hit, this is a pretty big deal. The really only drawback to the Sentinel is that it does require a lot of shield cells, but it did have a buff this season with the charge up lasting longer, which is nice. The Sentinel is a great option if you are looking for the mid to long range effectiveness and you want something that can really stop enemies in their tracks and force them to pop a battery, which does slow their advancement, which could be a big playmaker. Second up is a weapon that is not as strong as some other shotguns, but it's still an incredible secondary option, is the Peacekeeper shotgun. The PK is great if you only want to run one stack of shotgun ammo and you can use bag space for other things like heals and nades. I find that the Mozambique sometimes require 2 to 3 stacks of ammo. The Mastiff also sometimes requires 2 stacks of shotgun ammo. So if you are playing something like a Fuse or something that just needs more heals or more grenades, then the Peacekeeper is a really good gun to look at. The PK has the highest one hit potential out of any close range swap to, which is pretty nice, and the flexibility to use the choke in a longer range situation is a little bit niche, but it is still useful. A slightly better LMG than the one we discussed earlier is gonna be the Spitfire LMG. The Spitfire did have a damage buff this season, which is nice, but it still just lacks a little bit in the overall time to kill, because again, it's an LMG and you shouldn't really have a 50 mag gun that is the fastest killing gun in the game. We have seen this in the past. LMGs by default have a worse handling and a strafe speed, which does hurt them in a close range engagement. So this is something that you just have to be aware of. If you do have a Spitfire, you're going up against something like an SMG or maybe something like a shotgun, you're going to be a little bit more immobile and a little bit more stationary than your opponents. The Spitfire is a pretty good pub gun and you can run around and take a lot of fights, but I probably would skip it if you are looking for the best mid-range option in a ranked sense. A weapon that in my opinion has flown under the radar the last couple seasons but sees continued uses in the meta of Apex is the G7 Scout. The G7 is probably the easiest gun in the game to use. It's kind of like a 301 for tapfire guns. It's great as a mid to close range option. It's not too bad at longer ranges as well. It's not bad in its ammo consumption. It has light ammo. It has decent damage output. It can kind of do it all. The biggest thing for me is that the G7 feels really tough to use without an optic. I'm not quite sure what it is about the iron sight. I really want to try to get a 2 to 4x on it as quickly as I possibly can. And also understand the G7 is not going to be that gun that just puts enemies down. You're going to want the Sentinel Sniper if you do want that. It's more of a pressure farming gun that can be really solid for at least one member of the squad to run, so you can keep enemies at bay and continually tap into their shields. One of the most surprising weapons this season for me is going to be the P2020 Akimbos, and it was a gun that had one of the largest buffs this season. The only buff it really got was better base hipfire accuracy, but it was a really big deal. The P20s are low-key being slept on right now, as they are an incredible option as a secondary if you are looking to really conserve a little bit of ammo and you do need to go in and just fight it out with something like a G7 as your primary. The biggest problem though is that they just don't quite have the same secondary potential as a shotgun. You're not going to be able to pull out the P20s and just tap someone down like a Mastiff or a Mozambique could. You won't really swap to these and instantly drop someone. And also, you're not going to be maining the P2020s into a battle if you can help it, as they just don't have that same competitive range as like maybe a Volt SMG, maybe a 301 or a Flatline. The P20s are pretty good right now, I will say, and I could see them going up in my ranking as the season progresses, so definitely try them out if you haven't. And if you do get that purple laser on a P20 Akimbo, I find that they are quite good. Our second to last A tier gun is the Triple Take, which is also my highest rated marksman gun, slightly edging out the G7 Scout. The Triple Take has always been brainlessly easy to use. Anyone can really find success with this weapon, which is nice. It's great as a close range alternative in a pinch. You can kind of use it like a shotgun. The Triple Take does have better one-hit potential than a G7 if you do connect to the head, which is quite nice. It does have overall slower damage output though, due to to it needing to charge up to get the best accuracy possible. So if enemies are a little bit farther away, you're not going to really be able to push out as much damage as something like a Sentinel or a G7 Scout. But all that to the side, it's a really great ranked option right now. Less so in pubs as it's just not needed. It's probably the best damage farming gun as well, as you can connect shots from pretty much anywhere at any time. The final A tier weapon on top of this category is the Rampage LMG. The Rampage for me, I've been getting more and more fond of as seasons have progressed. It has an incredible amount of damage per mag. You get a purple mag, this thing can do 1000 damage to the body, which is absurd. The Rampage is easy to use. It has a low recoil, it has a low fire rate. You don't really need any attachments. It almost works like a hybrid between a marksman weapon and an LMG due to the slow fire rate. You can throw thermite in it to increase its capability, and the Rampage charge up much like the Sentinel also did just have a buff in its length. Overall, it's still a little bit slower in the time to kill, so it's not really competitive in close ranges, but for an LMG, it can kind of do it all. And if you want a hybrid gun where you can really be effective at everything, the Rampage is probably the best gun in the game for this. As we move forward, it has now been 21 months since we last received a new weapon in Apex. We do have the EPG coming in Season 23, but we have not tried it yet as of the posting of this video. But what type of gun you would like to see come into the game next? I personally want another shotgun or another light machine gun. We are now in S tier, which are for the most part the weapons you absolutely need to consider using. There's not many better options than these weapons. Sometimes being the strongest gun out there isn't necessarily needed if you are the easiest to use. The R301 is this, and it does get a soft S tier rating. Decent buffs to the R301 at the start of Season 22 have made it continue to be slightly relevant in Apex Legends meta. The R301 is easy to use, low recoil means it has great range, and it can do decent total damage now. Not the strongest option, but if you are in need of a running gun mid-range beamer, the R301 is just a really good choice. It does chunk through light ammo pretty quickly though, and if you are playing ranked, I find a marksman like the G7 might be a little bit better overall, as it is more versatile. But the R301 right now, I absolutely think deserves to be an S tier. It's not too bad, even though it is a little bit weaker. Slightly getting the leg up on the R301 though for me is going to be the Flatline assault rifle. The Flatline has just a more complete picture than the 301. It has good ammo consumption with that slower fire rate. It has more damage per mag since it does have a slower fire rate. It has a better time to kill, and the Flatline is a little bit better at close ranges. It's harder to use, but that's okay. We're not really ranking weapons on toughness. Flatline for me is the best option if you want the traditional Apex Legends assault rifle and it isn't a burst gun. This is going to be the gun that you really have to use because there really is no other choice than the Flatline right now. The only usable SMG from the ground in my eyes is going to be the Volt SMG. If you want a traditional secondary SMG because you just want to run it, this is your option. The Volt doesn't really need any attachments to be useful. This has always been the case. The iron sights aren't too bad. The damage per mag is decent, although at endgame there could be issues again against red armor. Overall, the Volt is just a very usable gun in Apex Legends Season 23, even though that meta is not centered around SMGs. Respawn did state they're looking at SMGs. They're probably going to make a comeback next season, but for right now, if you want to get your SMG feel on, the Volt is going to be the one to look at. Unlike SMGs, something the meta is centered around is shotguns, and even with the Season 22 introduction and then nerf of the Akimbo Mozambiques, they are still on top and absolutely something that you can be running today. If you hit your shots with the Mozam Akimbos, the time to kill is honestly still so good, and as is the total damage per mag. You can basically drop 2 fully healthed enemies with 1 mag if you are accurate. The only drawback of the Akimbo Mozams that I can think of is that you need to carry more ammo than say a PK or maybe even a massive, but I think it's a fair trade-off for the benefits that you are getting. Whether you need to main hand the Mozams into a fight because you have a sniper, or if you just need that secondary to finish enemies off, the Mozams are the real deal still. Don't sleep on them. Before we get to my god tier guns, we do have to cap off the S tier with the Nemesis Burst Assault Rifle. The Nemi has some of the best overall usability in the game. It's great as a mid-range gun with stellar DPS, decent at longer ranges, and still fine in a close-range hipfire aspect. The Nemesis, though, is energy, and it does chunk through ammo, so that is unfortunate, but it does make up for it with the damage that you do get. In my eyes, the Nemesis is the best all-around mid-range weapon. It just lacks some versatility at longer ranges, which is understandable. understandable, and you might have some ammo issues as well. So just keep this in mind. If you are playing more passive, you may want to skip the Nemesis. If you are playing more aggressive, then the Nemesis is a really good gun, probably the best gun in the game for you if you want that mid-range bursting AR. I want to give a quick big thanks to my channel members who are on screen. I greatly appreciate the extra support. I do want to briefly talk about the special weapons this season, which are Rift Relics or Relic weapons. While this doesn't affect ranked Apex, it absolutely affects pubs. I expect as the season goes on, these will be getting either added to or more options will be getting swapped out. Pretty much all of these guns so far though are god tier in my eyes. So if you truly want the best performing pub weapons, you honestly have to be picking up the Rift Relics. I only used the Rift Relic Wingman a couple times and I dropped a few 4Ks. They are the real deal. So for the first real god tier weapon, we do have the R99 SMG. The R99 SMG at the start of last season went into the care package and honestly was a little underwhelming for a care package gun, but it did have a big buff in the middle of last season. Ground SMGs might be kind of busted, but the care pack R9 is just absolutely incredible. It's easily a gun you can pick up every single time. It does have a decent amount of reserve ammo, which is also pretty good considering the Bocek and the Kraber just don't have quite as much in my eyes. It noticeably does give you a big advantage in close range one-on-ones that most guns just are not going to be able to compete with. You absolutely cannot bypass the R9. Do not let someone else get it. Make sure you're grabbing it. The second care package gun is up and it is the Havoc. The Havoc was meta for a long time, saw some nerfs, Akimbos came out, and the Havoc mostly saw a backseat last season. However, it is mostly meta again, although it is harder to find since it is in the care package. The Select Fire is a fun nostalgic thing to have on the Havoc right now, but it's not going to be really as competitive as a marksman gun. It's still a good option though, so you don't necessarily need to run a longer mid-range gun and also like a G7 with the Havoc. The Havoc time to kill though in the full auto mode is still nuts. Comes fully kitted, turbocharger. It's a gun that's much like the R9. You can be confident using it and you should be taking it basically every time that you see it. All right, so for the first true ground god tier weapon, we do have the Hemlock assault rifle. It's not as much of a pick as it was before season 22's nerfs, but still the best all-around weapon in Apex in my eyes is the Hemlock. If you want the complete mid-range, close range, and long-range experience packed into one gun, it has great damage production at close to mid-range bursting. It's good at long-range tap firing, something the Nemesis just cannot do. Heavy ammo goes a little bit further than the energy of the Nemesis as well, and also it only being a 3-shot burst instead of a 4 does help a little bit as well. Some still will not like the Hemlock since it is a burst gun. If you don't like this, it's okay. The flatline is there for you, but I suggest that you really try to look past this and try to love the Hemi. It's so good in ranked Apex Legends. And one of the top dogs on my list is probably a surprising one, but it is the Massive shotgun. I was really high on the Massive last season, and I did struggle a little bit with where to put it, but with the Mozambique's nerfs, I knew that this thing was going to be the gun to run, and the meta of the game around Apex has really reinforced a Mastiff culture or a Mastiff meta. Its damage is absolutely insane, and the fact that it's brutally difficult to hit less than a 45 shot damage is pretty nice. It makes the range really great and even a little bit more reliable. The Mastiff requires a lot less ammo than the Mozams. It has a bigger damage per hit, which is nice as well. You can reload a single shot at a time to keep your damage up and the downtime to a minimum, unlike the PK or the EVA 8. And like I kind of just said, there's so many lifeline ults, Gibby bubbles, Newcastle shields, and more. It kind of makes it a requirement for you to run a Mastiff if you want to have any sort of real success to peak fight enemies. The meta of the Legends absolutely affects the meta of the guns, and we are seeing this right now with just how many squads need to have a Mastiff since you are peak fighting a ton right now. Thanks for watching. Like this video if you want to support me. Check out this video on screen for more in the meta of Apex, and I will see you in the next one. Happy gaming, Legends.